George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
What the hell is going on in Germany? What's going on in London? The western satrapies of the American empire appear to be teetering on the brink of collapse, at least of regime change. And all is not well in the metropolis itself, as the Wall Street Journal reveals that Joe Biden was gaga before he entered the White House in 2020. And they all knew it. Talking of gaga, how crazy is the idea to appoint Lord Peter Mandelson, bosom buddy of Jeffrey Epstein, even after he was convicted of child sex trafficking offenses. He's the new British ambassador to Washington. Is this a five-dimensional chess move or a piece of absolute madness? And speaking of Jeffrey Epstein, will Donald Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files? It's all coming up tonight on the mother of all talk shows, so stay tuned and fasten your seatbelts.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Where to start? I've only got 20 minutes for this monologue. Not since Caligula appointed his horse as a proconsul of Rome has there been a more grotesque appointment than that of Peter Mandelson as His Majesty's representative, envoy to the presidency of the United States of America, British ambassador. A man who was twice sacked from the British cabinet for corruption. A man who left his subsequent job in the European Union under a very dark cloud. A man who was so close to Jeffrey Epstein, the child sex trafficker, now suicided, that he stayed in his house after Epstein had been convicted of child sex charges. A man who went shopping for white belts and tried them on over his shirt. Who tries on a belt in a shop? Well, the new British ambassador does, asking Jeffrey Epstein, does my bum look big in this? Or something to that effect. He is on record, not once but many times, as describing Donald Trump as no more than a white nationalist, a white supremacist. He is a man who has slandered the president, who he's going to have to deal with on a daily basis as Britain's ambassador in Washington. He was described by the co-chair of Donald Trump's presidential election campaign team as a moron. Well, I've known him for more than 40 years. A moron he is not. He is a knuckle-dragger, to be sure, but he's a highly cunning and sly one. Otherwise, he would not have survived all this time. He clearly has something on Keir Starmer, who has, coincidentally or not, taken off for what his aides say is a desperately needed holiday because he is suffering from the stresses and strains of 6 months as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, during which time he has become less popular than any Prime Minister in Britain's long and inglorious history of disastrous Prime Ministers. He makes Liz Truss look like JFK by comparison. The Keir Starmer Prime Ministership will not be as long for this world as you perhaps thought. A little runt called Wes Streeting is already on manoeuvres. I'd like to say he had that lean and hungry look, but there's nothing lean or hungry about him. He's a fat toad, but he's got Keir Starmer in his sights. And he is the true believer of the Blairite Mandelsonite flame, blue in every regard. He is determined to be Prime Minister before the next general election. And so a Labour government resting on a record parliamentary majority, which looked impregnable on the 5th of July, now looks extremely rocky in its prospects. They are losing by-election results every single Thursday, and importantly, they're losing them not to the Conservatives, though they have lost some to them. They're losing them to Nigel Farage's British Nationalist Reform Party, which is the British equivalent of the German AfD, to which I now turn. Just 48 hours ago, yet another Christmas market in Germany suffered a terrorist attack which murdered 5 people, one of them a child, and maimed more than 80 of them when they were out celebrating Christmas at a Christmas market in Magdeburg in the eastern part of Germany. The atrocity was carried out by a Saudi asylum seeker. That led to a rejoicing of kind in the camp of the nationalists in Europe when they thought they could mark it up as yet another Muslim terrorist operation. Until it emerged, thanks to Twitter and nothing and nowhere and no one else, thanks to Twitter, and more importantly, thanks to the very clever people who are everywhere on Twitter to be found, whose technical ability, whose hard-working character, and whose, well, brilliance quickly revealed, within an hour, revealed that the killer was, in fact, the anti-Muslim. He was a hater of Muslims. He was in Germany because he hated Muslims, or that and the rape charges that were hanging over him back in Saudi Arabia. He, for years, has been spewing hate on social media against Islam, against Muslims, and against what he alleged was the European willing surrender to the Islamification of Europe. So he was not an Islamist, he was the anti-Islamist. He was a supporter of Israel. Geert Wilders of the Netherlands was his hero. It's not me making these two allegations, it's him, the mass murderer of Magdeburg. It's him that said over and over again on his social media that Wilders was his hero. Tommy Robinson, the little jackbooter in England presently in prison, was one of his followers on social media. It doesn't get much more embarrassing than that, Tommy, does it? Well, the reality is this individual may well have been inflating his hatred of Islam to get political asylum in Germany in the first place. But once he got it, you would have thought that it would have died down, but no, it stepped up. The truth is, this pro-Israel, pro-Wilders, pro-Tommy Robinson, little tosspot of a mass murderer is someone who was acting on somebody's behalf. Unless it's one of these lone wolf mental illness cases, you know, when it's not a Muslim, it's mental illness that is ascribed to the reasoning behind these kind of mass school shootings or terrorist atrocities like this. Either it was that, or he was involved in some complicated psyop indeed. I first imagined it was a plot by the deep state in Germany to scupper the possibility of a victory of the AfD. That's the German equivalent of Nigel Farage. But if that was the purpose, it would appear to have backfired, because the only thing that matters to many millions of people in Germany is that this mass murderer should never have been in their country in the first place. And all the other crimes that have been committed by people who should not have been in their country in the first place is being counted now in the weighing of the political balance, which as soon as February, not much more than a month away from now, will be going to the polls in the German general elections. Because the leader of the AfD has just moved into pole position, just moved into the lead. The single most popular German prime ministerial candidate is the candidate of the AfD. I'm a supporter of Sarah Wagenknecht. I hope that she does very well. I hope that she is in a position to be part of a decent coalition government in Germany. But she's not even in the top 5 right at this moment. She's very strong in the east of Germany, but across Germany as a whole, currently polling between 8 and 9%. She's going to have to do a lot better than that. The truth is that little soldier Scholz, who destroyed his country on behalf of the United States government of Joe Biden, to which I shall turn in a moment, is the biggest loser. He looks a Keir Starmer minus of a prime minister now. He's been in now for several years, and everything in Germany has gotten worse. The factories have stopped turning. The big employers have closed down. A company which supplies Mercedes-Benz, which was founded in 1792 and survived Napoleon, survived World War I, survived World War II, survived the stresses and strains of the Hitlerite period against them, for they were not unlike others, Nazis themselves, has just filed for bankruptcy. 1792 to 2024. The reality is Germany has committed economic suicide by following Joe Biden's orders to go to war with Russia. No country in all of Europe has been more gung-ho for war with Russia than little Scholz's Germany. And the foreign minister, Anna Baerbock, if you don't know why I call her that, Google it and see, have presided over the destruction, not just of the German economy, but looking at the mass turnouts of far-right demonstrations across Germany this evening, may well have precipitated the fall of this German republic. A German nationalist party may now come to power. It is, of course, likely that they will withdraw from the war in Ukraine, and I'll be very happy about that. But it will also redouble the German support for Netanyahu's genocide against the Palestinian people. It will also preside over a wave of xenophobia and mass deportations of people who were invited to come to Germany in the first place. It will not be a very pleasant Germany. The future tomorrow may belong to the AfD, but that portends a potential nightmare for the rest of us. Economic collapse, the election of a German nationalist government steeped in revanchism. What could possibly go wrong? Speaking of the American empire, the Wall Street Journal has revealed all week the horrors of the Joe Biden presidency, which all these European governments followed over the cliff to their own destruction. Joe Biden did not go senile that night that George Clooney realized that all was not well. Joe Biden, according to the Wall Street Journal, was senile before he even entered the White House. And the election that I am in no doubt was rigged for him might well have led to the election of a presidency for a second term of a Joe Biden who'd been senile for the previous 4 years. That would have meant that the United States and the countries that follow it, wherever it wants to go, would have been in the hands of a man who couldn't scratch his arse because he didn't know where his arse was. And I could take that metaphor further, but good taste and the Christmas spirit precludes it. But that's how serious the situation was. A man who couldn't bite his nails, a man who couldn't find his way to the lavatory in the Vatican in time, a man who did not know where he was, what day of the week it was, whether his wife was his sister, his wife, and all the other madness that we have watched on social media over this last 4 years. The Joe Biden malaise. A curse on the Democratic Party, I hope. And I hope that the rigging of the election in 2020 will be one of the first orders on the agenda of the incoming Trump administration. Heads must roll for this. Heads must roll for lying to the American people and the people of the world that Joe Biden was as sharp as a tack when he was, in fact, not even with us. The elderly relative dribbling that we keep up in the attic and bring him down only when it is inescapable to do so. That president is the one who took America deeper and deeper into what might yet become World War III. That president is the one who pushed the European governments to obey his orders, even at the cost of their own economies, even at the cost of their own societies. There's so much going on, I can only now turn to the Ukraine. In the Ukraine, terrorism is now the last weapon that they have left. All the NATO weapons, all the hundreds of billions of NATO taxpayers' dollars, euros, and pounds have come down to firing drones at residential tower blocks in Kazan. That one hurt me more than others have because just a few weeks ago, I and much of the world, most of the world's representatives were present in that very city of Kazan. President Putin had just praised the city, and rightly so, as one of the great cities of the world, a completely divine and inspired place where Muslims and Christians live 50-50 with each other in perfect harmony. A beautiful, rising city was struck several times in terrorist attacks which looked for all the world like 9/11. The drone looked like one of these aircraft that smashed into the Twin Towers. It achieved nothing except killing the ordinary Russian citizens that were living in the house that the drone hit. It wasn't intended to achieve anything. It's the last throw of a criminal regime in Kiev, pumped up with the money, weapons, and diplomatic and media propaganda cover of the same Western countries that have taken their own countries into perdition in the service of little Zelensky and crazy Joe Biden. The front is collapsing. More soldiers are surrendering than at any time in the conflict. More territory is being conquered by the Russian armed forces than at any time in the conflict. Soon there will be nothing left to negotiate about. Soon Russia will take all of Ukraine, and they sure ain't going to negotiate with Zelensky in any circumstances. He has no legitimacy. His presidential term has run out. Someone in Kiev will have to create a new dispensation in their capital if they want Russia to sit down with them and to agree an end to this disastrous war, which has killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and led to the wiping off the map of the entire east of Ukraine. Someone is going to have to sit down and negotiate with Russia an end to this war based on Russia's demands that could have been acceded to, were acceded to in the Minsk agreements, guaranteed by Germany and by France, and later by the United Nations Security Council itself. If such an agreement is not reached, I fully expect that the Russians will go all the way to Kiev, and they will appoint a government there acceptable to them. So NATO has failed in the Ukraine. Question is, where is it going to try next? We'll be deep diving into that with two of the best guests around in the next 1 hour and 40 minutes. You've come to the right place. It's the mother of all talk shows. I don't believe that the mainland European countries give a toss about Britain, and I'm certain that the United States would not sacrifice itself for Britain. That's why I say Britain is completely marginalized. As for the Trident missiles, of course, if the United States, which has dual control over these missiles, gave permission for them to be launched, of course, they would incinerate Russian cities. But what good would that do us? Because we'd all be dead, including the people that fired the missiles. You feel me?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So the question in the poll is, will President Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files? Yes or no. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and give a thumbs up to the show. It helps us algorithmically. Well, a very overwhelming majority of you currently say no, that Donald Trump will not release the Jeffrey Epstein files. Why would that be, I ask myself. Anyway, get voting. You have an hour and 30 minutes, let's say, to vote on that poll. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 965522, and the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Garland Nixon, radio talk show host, political analyst, regular friend of the mother of all talk shows, joins me from the United States, and I'm grateful to him for doing so. Garland, let's start with that question in our poll. Will President Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files, in your opinion?
In my opinion, no. There are two particular pieces of information that people are concerned with. Donald Trump said that he would reveal the information, the final part of the puzzle for the JFK assassination and the connections to the CIA, the documentation that was legally required to have been released, but no president has released it. He said he would release that, and the Epstein files. But here's the reality. People already know the answers. This would be confirmation of what people already know. And I think that the the level of power that would be compromised were these two documents to be released are so significant and so high that they'll never allow Donald Trump to do that. So I think he may even intend to do it. I don't know, but I don't think Donald Trump will ever be allowed to do that. Remember, he wanted to, my understanding was that he wanted to at least pardon Snowden and possibly Assange, and he was told by his own party that they would join the Democrats and impeach him if he did that. So I think that he won't be allowed to do that, and I don't think that's at the top of the list for the people who put Donald Trump in office. They'd like to see that happen, but I think they've got bigger fish to fry.
Now, we'll come to Trump in a minute, but let's spend some time on Joe Biden. The Wall Street Journal has seen fit to tell us in the last few weeks of the Biden administration that he's been gaga since the very minute he walked through the door in 2020. And every day is a shocking revelation about the level of degeneration, physical and mental, of Joe Biden. And yet all these people lied and lied and lied to us about that. What's your take on it?
Well, I believe it was September 12th, 13th of 2020. There was an article that either ABC or NBC, people can look it up. There was an article where Julian Castro, at that time, he's from Texas. He was running against Joe Biden in the 2020 election, and he questioned Joe Biden's mental capacity at that time, and he was roundly attacked by the mainstream media. So the reality is, before he was even elected in 2020, there was a discussion about his mental ability. I have suspected all along, and I've voiced it even here on this show, that there was an intent to get rid of him, and that they ran a crooked primary so that there would be nobody in second place. And let's not forget, in the primary, they wouldn't even allow other people's name on the ballot. It was like a banana republic. You're going to vote for Joe Biden in the primary, and the only name on the ballot was Joe Biden. They knew he was bad. They stuck him out there in January so they could get rid of him. And just the plan went awry. But all who had paid attention to Joe Biden over his course of politics knew that at one time, even though I disagree with his politics, he was a pretty sharp guy. But by the time 2020 hit, he wasn't. There was not much of the original Joe Biden left, and now we are just talking about the obvious that everyone has known for at least 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, but you, me, and the rest of us who questioned him were lambasted, lashed by the so-called mainstream media for cruelty, for being Russian stooges. This was all Russian disinformation. Joe was sharp as a tack behind closed doors. Does no one take responsibility for that? Is there no accountability for that?
Well, absolutely not, because the fact of the matter is they continued with that hoax. Joe Biden was bad enough. And then they put Kamala Harris in his place, and they tried to tell us that she was brilliant and she was qualified and she was, the best they could possibly get. And she was horrific. She was not very bright, and she was wholly unable to answer a question. The only question that I ever heard her answer during the 3 months that she ran was when they asked her if she would do anything different than Joe Biden, and she said, "I can't think of anything." Other than that, she never answered a single question. So the Democratic Party is putting forth these absurd clowns for candidates and then attacking us when we point out the obvious about their competency or the lack thereof.
They must be in deep you-know-what now, the Democrats, because Trump seems to me a pretty vengeful guy, and he's got quite a lot to get revenge for. Don't you think he and, Steve Bannon, who went to prison, and the real true believers in Donald Trump, don't you think they're going to come gunning for the Democrats? And they're not short of ammunition.
Right, not just the Democrats, the entire machine that the Democrats use. Donald Trump has already started winning recently within the last few weeks. He got a $15 million settlement with ABC News because George Stephanopoulos falsely called him a rapist. He won it. He's filed a lawsuit against an Iowa pollster, an Iowa polling company, who put out this strange poll that said Donald Trump was losing to Kamala Harris by 3 points in Iowa, a state that he won by 13 points. They missed it by 16 points a week and a half before the election. He also, I believe he has oh, by the way, Faniwillis in Georgia, the prosecutor in Georgia, an appeals court has just thrown her off the prosecution team, which means this case will likely get moved out of Atlanta into a more rural area where it would surely be quickly done away with. So Donald Trump has already started, if he's going after the Democrats and the machine, the political machine that tried to stop him, he's already started with his winning ways, and he's 3-0 so far at least. And I expect that actually Donald Trump is going to go after that infrastructure, that media infrastructure, which is going to include government leakers. Joe Biden's talked about pardoning Liz Cheney, pardoning Adam Schiff, and this is about leaking. This is about Liz Cheney being accused, at this point, credibly accused by a government report of witness tampering. So I just think the machine is in deep and serious trouble, and Donald Trump has a target-rich environment if he wants to go after the people who violated laws and violated policies to try to stop him.
A target-rich environment. I totally love that. Low-hanging fruit at home and indeed abroad, because there's a pattern now developing of Joe Biden's closest allies in the world. I mean, let's start in South Korea, where the guy they wanted to, I don't know, give medals to, went completely berserk, ordered the army to invade the parliament, declare martial law, then only to march the soldiers down again, and then got impeached. Biden's Asia policy doesn't look too healthy, but the European policy looks even worse. Scholz and baerbock, Macron are all teetering on the brink, and they're paying the price for their blind obedience to a man, Joe Biden, that was, to all intents and purposes, blind when he was giving them the orders.
Oh, well, you left out just a few miles north of here. You left out Canada, where Prime Minister Trudeau has, he's certainly on the way out. I suspect that the neoliberal bunch, all the kind of, I call them the Obama lookalikes. They want these good-looking guys, with the exception of Scholz, surely, but these good-looking, young, smart guys that look great in a suit that are absolutely, simply just compradors for the U.S. empire. They're going to go down. But I'll tell you what, here's a prediction I have. All these people and all of these Trump haters, these people, there's no honor amongst thieves. The day Donald Trump becomes the president, they will do a 180, or as Annalena Baerbock would say, a 360, but they will absolutely reverse course, and they will go turn from anti-Trump people. It will be Donald Trump, we always loved you, we always support you. They have spine, they have no substance, and they will do a complete reversal of course, and they will be standing in line to kiss Donald Trump's ring. I will bet you that.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at a video from before the 2016 victory from Lindsey Graham, in which he was fulminating that Donald Trump was not a fit and proper person to be the president of the United States. There was no name that Lindsey Graham didn't call him. Little Marcorubio, ditto. Prior to the 2020, and there's people in that rhino rump inside the Congress, Republican in name only, who voted to impeach Trump. Is he going to deal with these people, or like Rubio, are some of them going to be rewarded?
It may be a joke, maybe not, but for a while I've suspected that the only reason he brought Marco Rubio in is to get the joy of firing him within the first 3 months. Let's not forget, Donald Trump puts forth a first draft of his cabinet. Usually, I mean, if you look at that, how many Secretary of States and secretaries of whatever, he usually goes through 2 or 3 of these positions. So I suspect he brought Marco Rubio in so he could build him up, and within 2 or 3 months, he'll fire him in the most humiliating way and put the guy that he really wants in there. So Marco Rubio he's set up to be smacked down by Donald Trump. I don't think it's going to work out well for him. I think he'll humiliate him a while, and then after he's thoroughly humiliated him, he'll just finish him off by firing him.
Now, Vladimir Putin said last week that he had not spoken to Donald Trump for 4 years. And I believe him. I don't think Putin would tell a lie in front of the world on that point, a lie which could easily be disproven. But Donald Trump said today that he's going to be meeting with Putin, and that both of them were looking forward to it very much. Are they going to meet? Where do you think they'll meet? Given that Putin cannot travel to many places. Where will they meet, and what will they discuss? What will they decide? Is the war in Ukraine really going to come to an abrupt end, in your view?
Well, I do believe that he's going to meet President Putin. I do believe that Donald Trump sees this Ukraine thing as a way that he can demonstrate his power and authority. I think Donald Trump is really looking forward to trying to, whether he can or not, I'm not sure, but I think he's really looking forward to it, because I think Donald Trump's position is Putin's a tough guy. He doesn't see President Putin or President Xi or et cetera as adversaries to hate. He sees them as tough people that he can kind of get in the ring and tussle it up with and hopefully get an advantage. So he doesn't. I don't think he hates Putin in the way that the blob does. But I think he will meet him. I think it will probably have to be in Russia or in maybe one of the stands, so that President Putin feels comfortable that he's not going to be backstabbed by some of the people around, the whole ICC case, et cetera. But I think he meets with him. Whether he can get a deal, I'm going to stick my neck out and say yes right now. I'm going to stick my neck out and say yes. I think he does get a deal. I would commend people to read a Politico op-ed that was written by RFK Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. A few months ago. And if you read that, you understand that the people around Donald Trump actually do understand the Ukraine conflict and understand the foundations on which this conflict was brought forward. And I think if you really understand this conflict, you have an opportunity to get a deal. I think Donald Trump understands a lot more about the conflict than he's letting on with his public rhetoric. So I'm gonna guess and say yes.
I'm pretty impressed by Donald Trump Jr. I may have put that point to you before. I watched them on the election night at some length with Tucker Carlson, and I've since read the op-ed you refer to and other things that he's said and written. If I were Donald Trump Sr., I'd be looking at why make all these T-shirts and hats and posters again? Get the boy to run next time. But only time to ask you about China, Garland. Again, counterintuitively, Donald Trump was waxing lyrical this week about his relationship with Xi Jinping, how they'd walked for miles. He doesn't look like the man that walks miles to me. Actually, neither of them do. But they apparently walked for miles. They got on famously. Although whether Xi Jinping understood anything Donald was saying must be debatable. But he didn't sound like the guy that's about to go to war with China either.
Right. I don't think Donald Trump's inclination is war. I think, historically, you can look at many instances where there were generals on opposite sides of the wars, and they met. and they respected each other, and they walked away and they wrote about the great respect that they had for the other general, even though they fought. They respected the person and their abilities. I think Donald Trump is more that type, wherein the Biden people are more, we hate the Russians or we hate the Chinese, or it's just a kind of this pure and some types ethnic hatred or some kind of a hegemonic hatred. I think Donald Trump, even the countries that he sees as adversaries, sees the leaders of the countries as a worthy, strong, and proud adversary to go up against, that he can, confront, and then he can win. I think Donald Trump sees the conflict with China, and I hate to use that word because don't think there should be a conflict, but I think he sees that as an economic conflict, as a diplomatic conflict, et cetera. I don't think he sees that as a potential military conflict because, again, he talks about nuclear war, and Donald Trump understands, I think, the dangers of World War III and the dangers of nuclear conflict, and he's spoken of those things. So I think Donald Trump wants deals. Remember, Donald Trump, a while back, when they asked him about dealing with China's electric vehicles, he said, well, if they want to sell them here, they should build factories here, and they should employ Americans to build them, and maybe they can sell them here. Well, there are a lot of people on the left, such as me, who says, that sounds kind of like my politics, maybe not in the same way, but that's the direction I would go.
Yeah, you and me both. Now, there's a man in brothel creepers, as we call them here, soft shoeing his way across the Atlantic, Garland, coming to see you. One Peter Mandelson. I advise you to give him a wide berth, and if you have to sup with him, do it with a very long spoon, and if you have to shake hands with him, count your fingers when he lets go. What's the response in the US to Mandelson's appointment, or are they more like Britain? What's that? Peter Mandelson? Who's he?
Exactly. I think right now Americans look at Britain kind of like they do the Hollywood. Right now, Hollywood, people look at the movies they put out and they're like, well, you people are all, you kind of feel good about yourself and you're making a lot of noise about how great and moral you are, but you're putting out terrible movies and nobody goes to see them. You're a disaster. Amongst yourselves, you believe that you're great, but everybody else is laughing at you. And I think that's the way Americans look at the British ruling elite and the British leaders. You guys think you're so smart. Your own citizens hate you, and we're just laughing at you, and we can laugh at you because we're not feeling the pain of your incompetence, but your people are. So I think Americans at this point aren't even looking at the leadership in Britain as a competent group that should be discussed. It's like, gee, we feel sorry for the British working class, and we hope that at some point they'll be able to get rid of these clowns.
Well, I can only say here to that. Garland, have a very Merry Christmas, and we'll see you again in the new year. Garland Nixon, radio talk show host, political analyst supreme. Thanks for joining us. Will President Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files? Yes or no? 20,000 or so of you have already voted. Most of you think no. Is that for the same reasons as Garland just adumbrated? I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll see if any callers demur. Let me take a quick break. Then it's Helen in Cornwall and Abdi in Minnesota. Stay tuned. President Putin definitely isn't Nikita Khrushchev, who was a clown, in my opinion. Neither is he Stalin. But he's much closer to Stalin than any other Russian leader has ever been. He has a mind that calamity has hardened and turned to steel. He is extremely cautious, but cautious only for a purpose. He is cautious in the hope that the goals of the operation that he's involved the country in can be achieved. But no one should mistake that caution for weakness. I've met the man. 3 times I've met him. I've met lots of leaders. I've met leaders from all over the world, including all of the British leaders. that I sat in Parliament under. Vladimir Putin is a very determined guy. He has a clear set of goals. He told you about them in 2007 in Munich. He warned you in 2007 that Russia regarded NATO encroachment in Ukraine as a red line matter for the existential survival of the Russian Federation, which it is his job to defend, and nobody should make the mistake of thinking that he will not do that job. People misunderestimated Stalin, but Stalin wasn't Stalin when he told the beast of Berlin that we will crush you in your lair. Stalin wasn't Stalin. Putin isn't Stalin. Trust me on that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will President Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files, yes or no? On Telegram, on X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. It's toll free to call the show in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522, and the worldwide number 0044 203 966 2625. Let's go to Cornwall, where Helen wants to talk about the children in Gaza. Helen, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. I'm not doing this because I've been asked. I'm doing this on my own back, and I sponsor a child from Gaza anyway. I would like to ask the audience if they would consider going onto the website of, there's a charity in the UK. It's called orphansinneed.org.uk. They are sponsoring children, but the children have done a little video in Gaza, and they're humbly asking for prayers. They're asking for prayers if you can write them, and they're gathering in 3 various places this week, in various mosques in England. I think there's one in London, to all gather together and jointly with the families in Gaza. And that's all I wanted to ask. Please don't forget the children.
Well, thank you, Helen. None of us will ever, could ever forget the children in Gaza. Another horrific day, ghastly beyond words, of decapitated, amputated, mutilated, murdered children in Gaza, just like every other day. They were close to a ceasefire, they said, a couple of days ago. Where is that ceasefire? They are still murdering at will, mainly women and children. And the horror of it all is that it's being done with the full support and complicity, openly or in silence, of the entire ruling elite in Britain, including its so-called Fourth Estate, its mass media. It is miserable beyond belief. It makes me as sad as the first day of the Christian era, when Jesus was excoriated and stoned and then crucified in Jerusalem itself. Helen in Cornwall, thank you for that call and that reminder. Abdi in Minnesota wants to talk about Syria and Palestine. Go ahead, Abdi.
Good evening, Georgia. How are you? Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Walaikum salam. What would you like to say, Abdi?
Hey, I would like to, first of all, just follow up with a little thing that I picked it up, your conversation with Mr. Nixon and you. I don't think Putin has ever talked to Donald Trump. The only reason is Putin, we all know that he's a KGB background, and he's a very, very intelligent leader. And I think he wouldn't dare like, even call Donald Trump. If you know, for 8 years ago, they were telling him that Putin elected him. So I think for that matter, I don't think he will ever talk to on an open field or like a telephone. And I know Putin is good friends of him. And I think one of the reasons is that's why Donald Trump is always boasting and saying, I'm putting this war to an end, which we all love to see that.
Indeed we would.
So too. So my other thing is, I just wanted to follow up with your point of last week when you said, like, the Syrians that have been immigrated to the Europeans and the West, will they now return? And my thing is, for us even thinking of that, don't you think we are helping his name, like, the Turkish president Erdogan? Because we know there are over 10 million Syrians, Sunni Syrians, that have immigrated in that land. They established themselves over there. They have been there for a while. And just like everywhere else, don't you think it's a little bit like, backwards for us now to say, are they coming back to Syria? And the other thing I wanted to ask you is...
the new government in Syria has asked them to come back. They claimed, many of them, most of them, that they were applying for refugee status because they were against the previous government there. And if refugee status is going to mean anything, it must be temporary. I mean, if your intention is to emigrate to another country, well, that's a whole different thing. But if you say you want political asylum from a given set of rulers, a given set of circumstances, when those rulers and circumstances change, your asylum status must change. And I don't know if you're aware of it, Abdi, it's probably similar in some parts of the United States, maybe not in Minnesota, from my memory, but there are many places in Europe that don't want to have endless flows of refugees. Now, I tried to say to them, well, if you want to stop the boats, you'll have to stop the wars. Well, the war is stopped in Syria. The rebels have won. So if you are a political asylum seeker in Britain, you should now go back to Syria because the people you were fleeing from have gone. They now have fled. Abdi, thanks for the call. Now, if you want to make comments on YouTube, scan the QR code now. Leave a comment on the YouTube stream and we'll try and read it out. Steve Richter says, will Aussie Cossack be freed in a prisoner exchange deal between Russia and Australia? Crikey, Steve, I thought I was the only one that was thinking along those lines. As soon as I saw a video of an Australian mercenary who says he's a biology teacher fighting as a mercenary in Zelensky's army, I mean, I knew wages for biology teachers in Australia were not likely to be great, but to risk your life on the Eastern Front for Zelensky, for money, doesn't seem like a very wise career choice that a man of that education would make. But anyway, I've seen the interview. He's Australian. He's a prisoner of the Russians. The Aussie Cossack is a prisoner of the Australians. I'm not Henry Kissinger, but even I could broker that prisoner exchange. Go ahead and do it. Abu Swalhe Musafir says Trump is a monster. Never will he even think of releasing the Jeffrey Epstein files. And Sophia says, we all knew Biden was not cognitively there from the start. The entire country chose to close their eyes. So this is hypocritical. Blame the voters. I blame those that lied to the voters, myself. And Cobra Commander says, will Jeffrey Epstein's best friend release files showing he murdered Jeffrey? No, Trump will not do that. You lost me there, Commander. Oliver Law 02 says Elon Musk is the new First Lady of the USA. Well, Hunnar in Indiana in the US is on the line about Syria. Let's hear him. Hunnar, what do you want to say?
Hello, George. How are you? I appreciate your platform.
All good, sir. Go ahead.
I just want to ask about Kurdish situation in Syria. I hear everybody talking about oppression in Palestine, but it hurt my heart when nobody talks about Kurdish situation, whether in Syria, in Turkey, in Iran, in Iraq. And now that we see that the gangster of Erdogan are running in the cities of Afrin and northern part of Syria, nobody talks about the slaughter that they are carrying on against the minority of Kurds. Where are your voices? Where are your voices for freedom and the right of the minorities when we see all these makeshift Al-Qaeda groups and those groups that are supported by Erdogan and the Turkish nationalists against the Kurds? I would like to hear your opinion. Thank you very much.
Well, if you've been listening, you'll have heard it repeated over 40 years. So I'm not one of those that you're referring to, who never speaks about the historic injustice of well over 40 million, getting on for 50 million Kurdish people who don't have a state of their own. And they have been picked up and put back on the shelf so many times, even in my own lifetime, never mind in history, that I've lost count of how many alliance changes there have been. Now, the Kurdish factions in Syria are under the protection of the United States of America. That was a choice that they made. Rather than reconciling with the previous government in Damascus, they decided to put all their eggs in Joe Biden's basket. Now, will Joe Biden protect them now that Erdogan's army is on the march and seeking to destroy their autonomous enclave, Rojava they call it, Rojava? Will the Americans come to their aid, rescue them against their NATO ally Turkey? Well, you'll know that better than me. Speaking personally, I wouldn't have put my eggs in Joe Biden's basket in the first place. Now, it's been a big week on the podcast. We're in the top 20 in Saudi Arabia. What do you make of that? Bulgaria and Poland these past few days. Can we make it to Christmas #1? You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. And you can listen to the weekly podcast via the moats.tv website. Gordon is in the Isle of Lewis on Sharia law. My goodness, that must be a big issue on the Isle of Lewis, Gordon.
Well, George, considering today's events, it seems to be very prescient because I've been reading, you're educating people from the very beginning, and the people here in your chat tonight are kind of lost over the Sharia law thing. George, you're an erudite, educated man. Can you show me a book of Sharia law, like Blackstone's commentaries or even Black's Law? No such thing exists.
Well, I've never seen one. I've never seen one, but it's quite likely that such a thing exists. This is a hoax issue that is got up by people who hate people of color, to be frank. They don't like them being Muslim, but they wouldn't like them any more if they were Hindus or Sikhs or Nigerian Christians. Trust me on that. They talk about deporting Muslims. How can you deport people who were born here, who are British, who happen to follow the faith of Islam? How could you do that? I have thousands of friends in the northwest of England who are Muslims. But if you have them speak, we're talking Jimmy Clitheroe here. We're talking Coronation Street here. They are as English as any Englishman. They've just got a brown skin. And they follow the faith of Islam. And when people say deport them, what are you talking about? You can deport asylum seekers, maybe, but you can't deport Muslims. Muslims can be white university professors. What are you going to say? We're deporting you because you're a Muslim, even though you were born here and your ancestors for 1,000 years were born here. This is just a stupid hoax. These Sharia law courts are voluntary courts with no legal standing, whose judgments cannot be enforced. These Sharia courts are operating under and subservient to British state law. But if a Muslim man and wife ask a Sharia court to adjudicate on their marriage, why is that any different to a Jewish man and wife who might well do the very same thing under Jewish canon law courts? These are about internal religious matters between people of the same faith. And if either is not happy with the decision made by the Sharia court, they can walk out the door and tear it up. No one can enforce it. It has no legal standing. The people who whip it up on this, Gordon, are people who just hate. They're just haters because they think the reason for the poverty in the Isle of Lewis, where I doubt there's 5 Muslims on the island, is because Abdul owns a corner shop or Savinda owns an Indian takeaway in their community. Thanks for the call, though. After this quick break, it's Colonel Daniel L. Davis, the host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive. And you'd really be a fool to miss him, especially tonight. Stay tuned. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will President Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files, yes or no? 20,290 of you have voted, and it's fair to say, with the exception, again, of Elon Musk's X, the vast majority of you say no. But on Twitter, it's a bit more even. 30% say yes, 70% say no. But either way, the overwhelming majority say no. Let me ask Daniel Davis, host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, our guest this evening, I'm glad to say, what he thinks about that. Colonel Davis, thanks for joining us. Will President Trump release the Epstein files? It doesn't matter if he does or he doesn't.
I honestly I have been tracking that situation very closely, but I think like so many things, it's really a lot of politics one way or the other. I'm all about truth. I would love it if he released everything, that's not have a genuine national security classifications, whether it's that or the JFK files. I'd like to see all of those be released. You can't claim anything about national security on that. But these things are political, and we'll have to see how it actually shakes out. But I'm all about truth, actually.
Now, how's the confirmation process beginning to look? Trump made a number of nominations, some of whom have fallen even before the first hurdle. Matt Gaetz, for example, fell before he got to the first fence, and there have been others. Kash Patel might be lucky to get the nod as head of the FBI. There's people going to oppose even Tulsigabbard and RFK Jr. What's the lay of the land on all that?
Yeah, honestly, I think that Tulsi Gabbard is maybe the biggest hurdle that there is for the Trump administration, and the biggest lightning rod for this whole issue, because there's so many in Washington, and unfortunately some even in Trump's inner circle, that are still basically unrecounted neocons, that are still kind of war hawks, and they're trying to put on Trump clothes to try to get in there, and those guys seem to be having a lot easier time of it. But those like Tulsi Gabbard, and I think that that's the most important one in my personal opinion, because she is absolutely, all the time she was a Democrat, she was absolutely about what is right and what is true, and that's what she stood up for, no matter what the party said. And then now that she, of course, left the Democratic Party, and she has just recently joined the Republican Party, and she has absolutely stood very firm for her entire career, and now that she will tell the truth about what is going on. She will faithfully convey the actual intelligence to the president, part of his presidential daily brief. So the position is incredibly important. And these people do not want her in there. There have been a number of articles where, so-called high-ranking Republican senators, leaked information out. But when you look at what was actually released out, it's basically innuendo and accusations with no evidence. They say she's pro-Russian. They say, she coddles up to dictators, Bashar al-Assad in 2014, I think it was, 2015. 2017, I'm sorry. But anyone who's, and if you look at what she said, then at the time, she said she just wanted to talk about anything she could do to bring peace to that violent situation there, to help the people of Syria out. You had John Bolton, one of the worst neocons in America. He's completely against her, and he actually lies about her in public by saying she made this video once where she justified the Russian invasion of Ukraine because of some biolabs or something like that. When you watch the actual video that Tulsi Gabbard made, all she was saying was there are American biolabs there, and we need to secure all those toxins and everything else, whatever they're doing, needs to be secured so it doesn't get out in an active war zone. Something very, very reasonable. But they twist that and say she gave justification, which she didn't do. That tells you all you need to know, that the John Bolton types want to do everything they can to make sure nobody who's going to tell the truth and accurate information to the president, they want him out of the way, because all they want is somebody like John Bolton who will tell the president, yeah, go to war, use force here, and selectively put the intelligence to make it look like we ought to take military action. So I think it is vital for Trump to make sure that she does get confirmed, and if he needs to, bend a few elbows on some of his Republican colleagues, I think he needs to do it.
Well, he'd be a fool not to. I mean, he has to stamp his authority on the new Congress that presumably will come into office at the same time as him, unless I've got that constitutionally wrong, because he can't get into a situation where these rhinos, and there's still quite a few of them around, are frustrating his presidential program. After all, they were all elected on his coattails.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, and I think part of the the reason why you can see why she's the perfect fit. I actually, full disclosure, I've known Tulsi for quite a number of years, and I texted her the other day and told her my wife and I were praying for her, talking, obviously observing how everybody's bringing out the knives, trying to get her. And she says, I appreciate that. But she says, listen, they will fail. We will get this through. And she has incredible confidence that she's going to be confirmed. And then you saw right after that, you saw that President Trump took her and just a handful of other people to an Army-Navy football game that was held to make sure that everybody sees she's in his inner circle. And I think she's going to be right. I think she's going to end up getting confirmed.
So the Wall Street Journal tells us that contrary to what all the media told us before, Joe Biden is gaga and has been since the beginning. How are Americans reacting to that, Colonel?
I'm sorry, I actually didn't catch it. Gaga about what? I missed that.
Well, the Wall Street Journal has revealed, Gaga might not cross the Atlantic, has revealed that Joe Biden's been senile since the first day of his presidency. That this malaise is not something that just crept up on us and had to see him removed as a matter of urgency. As a matter of fact, they've all been concealing his madness from us all along.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that just objectively speaking, when you saw from, say, January of this year all the way up to June, you had one Democratic leader after another literally reading from the same script saying, oh, he is sharp as a tack. I heard that statement 1,000 times verbatim from all these different people. Behind closed doors, he is so on it. He's asking all the hard questions. He is definitely on it. He gets tired sometimes a little bit, sure. I mean, just almost like they're actually reading from a piece of paper, something like that. And then all of a sudden, come that June debate with President Trump, where it was on full display for everyone to see and you couldn't hide it anymore, instantaneously you saw them turn and now they say, oh, he can't actually make it, so we need to get rid of him and go with Kamala Harris. So in my view, the evidence is pretty strong that there was a concerted effort in the part of the Democrats to hide all this stuff, because there's zero chance that you can make a plausible argument that what we saw with our own eyes in that debate, and had seen many other times in public when he had given statements in the first half of the year, it was evident that there was some serious degeneration of his mental capacity. It was self-evident, but they kept saying no. And then when apparently they were ready to shift to Kamala Harris, now then they just said, oh yeah, he definitely can't. Well, there was a exchange he had just a couple of days ago about what's going on in the Russia-Ukraine war, and whether there should be a negotiated settlement or some kind of a ceasefire for Christmas, etc. I mean, honestly, he couldn't even put a sentence together. So I think it is significantly degraded even since that time. And obviously, I think that they're just hoping they can limp through to January 20th. They don't want to take they go through the trouble of, quote, embarrassing him on the way out, et cetera. And honestly, we have to pray that there is no crisis that demands, a president that can look forward and make decisions right now, life and death potentially on our country. I hope that doesn't happen. But I just think if we're being honest, no Republican, Democrat, anything, it's self-evident that there is some significant degeneration in the capacity there. And the right thing to do is for Joe Biden to step aside and say, hey, even if it's just for another month or so, it's time to let, pass the chains on to somebody who's there. Whether you like or don't like Kamala Harris, she is still completely coherent and can do the job there. But I just think it's potentially problematic.
Coherent, but I take your I take your
I get
point.
What you're saying.
Completely coherent. Yeah, completely coherent. She's never been accused of being. But it reminded me of that great Groucho Marx sketch when Groucho's wife comes in, catches him in bed with his secretary, and he's denying everything, and he finally says, who are you going to believe, me or the evidence of your own eyes? And that's exactly how we've been played over the Biden affair. Yeah. But you're a man of war, which is why you don't like war. So let me turn to the wars, Colonel. On the Eastern Front, first, the Russians seem to be carrying all before them. On the battlefield, Ukraine is reduced more and more to terrorist attacks. on civilian targets, flying drones into tower blocks, residential tower blocks. In Kazan, which I saw, I must have seen 50 times when I was in Kazan recently for the BRICS, a tall residential tower block. No purpose to bombing it at all except to kill the people that lived there, making no impact on the course of the war at all. How could it? So how do you see that front, the Ukraine front? 4 weeks to go. How far will Putin advance in that 4 weeks? And how quickly will Donald Trump be able to get round a table with him?
Yeah, Mr. Galloway, the bottom line is point blank, the war is lost. Period. No caveats, no possibility of any other outcome. The only rational, moral, logical thing to do is to seek a negotiated deal on the best terms you can get for Kiev and just, end the destruction, end the killing. But instead, we're continuing on. The West primarily, Keir Starmer, Joe Biden, Macron, even still some in the German Federation there, they're continuing to, just shovel more and more ammunition and weapon in there with no idea what it's supposed to accomplish, what they're doing it for. And, this whole issue you're talking about right now with this attack in Kazan, and there was a couple of others on this, actually one other on the same day into Russia, and that was in response to just the previous day when Russia had attacked basically the KGB, CIA kind of version of what was in the special services in Kiev. And they hit part of the missile, whether it was intended or not. I don't have enough information to know, but it did hit a civilian target inside of Kiev, along with the actual SBU building. And so this was their response to that. But then you have to ask, even that, towards what end? What are you trying to accomplish? Russia was responding with that strike on the 20th to the last round of ATACMS long-range missiles that were fired into Russia. And Putin keeps saying there will be consequences for each one of these. And so far, he has been good to his word, but he hasn't escalated beyond because I think he does want the war to be over. So as soon as Trump can get in, I think he's ready to have a negotiated settlement. But here's a big problem with the potential for that. If you have Trump coming in thinking he's going to have some kind of leverage over Putin and he's going to have some kind of a good outcome that Zelensky can live with, that might be happy about, we could be in for a difficult negotiation because Vladimir Putin has been very clear and reiterated it within the last week or so that the minimum set that they're even going to talk about is if you abandon all of the 4 oblasts that they annexed in 2022, that there is denuclearization of of whatever's resulting from Kiev, and that it never join NATO. And so those are the minimum beginning statements for Putin. Now, if Trump is not willing to enter into that, if he says, well, I'll just put more stuff in there, I'll just put more pressure on you, then Putin will go, I wish you wouldn't do it, but okay, if you want to, that's your prerogative. We on our hand will continue this methodical push to the West, and eventually there won't be anything to negotiate. Russia will eventually capture all the territory that Putin's wants because they can. They have the capacity, they have the manpower, they definitely have the political will, and though Ukraine's side doesn't want to, and they want to get stuff from the West, it doesn't matter at this point how much stuff the West gives, because it's all about manpower. And if you don't have a trained army, it doesn't matter how much equipment that you have. You can't defeat the side that has equipment, ammunition, and manpower. And Russia has probably somewhere close to 800,000 more men than Ukraine does in uniform today, and of course millions more if they ever need it, if it needs to get to that. There is no rational path that you should ever say, let's fight one more day for an objective that can never be accomplished. And the only thing we do, Mr. Galloway, and this is one of the things that just really gets me more than anything and makes me angry, is that by doing this political issue to continue providing for the war and giving funds to Zelensky and all it does is increase the cost of their eventual failure. It won't change it. There'll be more men killed, more territory lost, more buildings destroyed because we won't acknowledge reality.
And more of our money burned, of course. Biden is writing a farewell check of God knows how many billions to Zelensky, the British government, who are presiding over the freezing to death of our own old age pensioners this winter, are giving money hand over fist to a guy who's already lost. I mean, talk about reinforcing failure. Finally, Colonel, I know you don't follow the British Armed Forces as closely as you follow the American, but if I were to tell you that the Telegraph revealed today that in the last year, 16,000 British soldiers have left the army, that our entire armed forces, Army, Navy and Air Force, would fit into a mid-table football stadium and still have room for a whole herd of elephants at the back, that our jewel in the crown of the Royal Navy, the HM Queen Elizabeth, is out for a year and even in an emergency would not be in a position to fight for 6 months, even if they just band-aided it. Why do you think the British government swaggers around like Mussolini used to do, threatening people with Hitler's army? The British government goes around threatening people with America's army, because we sure ain't able to threaten them with our own army. What do you make of this? This is, by the way, Colonel, after a 6% wage increase and further payments to aid retention, people are flooding out of the British Armed Forces. My apologies for interrupting you.
Yeah, no, I think that there's probably a lot of similarities between what's happening in the U.S. Armed Forces. Maybe the numbers aren't quite as large, but we're having the same problems recruiting. And I think probably at the heart of it, it's the same issue, is that, look, when I joined in the 1985, first of all, as a private, before I even became an officer, I did it out of patriotic duty to my country. And I wanted to defend our country and our way of life and was willing to risk my life if it ever came to that, because I thought it was worth it. But today, and especially since 9/11, things have just gone in the toilet since 9/11, because no longer is it defend your country and serve with honor. It's like, hey, we're just going to throw you out in the middle of Syria and just leave you there, even though none of our national security effort is involved, or even though it's illegal for us to even be there. But yeah, whatever. And we're going to be in the Middle East, and these thousands, we're going to continue to threaten possibly war with Russia and get ready for that. Then we're talking about it in the Indo-Pacific. We might even go to war with China. When nobody wants to go to war with China or Russia or Iran or North Korea or any of this other mess. And they're saying, why would I want to join a military like that? And so I think that they're leaving because they see it's no longer about the patriotic duty that I still to this day am very proud of. But I wouldn't join today. I wouldn't do it today because I don't have the confidence in the leadership. I've seen them lie to the American people routinely. And I'm talking about the generals, people in uniform, not just the Department of Defense. And I think I've seen similar things in the British side too. And I bet, and you're right, I don't have as much fidelity on this, but I suspect that a lot of the same things are occurring to the British men, especially, that they don't want to serve in a place like that and potentially lose their lives in the defense of God only knows what they're doing, in the different deployments.
Yeah, dying for Keir Starmer would never be a good idea for anyone. Colonel Daniel Davis, as always, a great tour de force. Thank you very much for joining us on the Mother of
Always my
All
pleasure.
Talk Shows. Let me take a quick break. And then it's your calls all the way up to Gayatri's social media roundup. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will President Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files? And will Britain's new ambassador to Washington feature in them? That might have been a more interesting question. Well, 21,333 of you have voted. You've still got 20 minutes to say yes or no to that question. Will President Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files? Let's go to line 3, where Simon from Weaponized News wants to talk about Trump's soft invasion of Mexico. Tell us, Simon.
Season's greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. And we've had some very curious announcements from President Trump in the last few hours. Story has come out about the incoming administration talking very much like the Tom Clancy book and movie with Harrison Ford, completing a soft invasion of Mexico in order to take on the drug cartels. Who would have ever thought that that might spin out of control? I suggest that people over the Christmas period might like to be watching some of those movies again to realize that they didn't always work out in the hegemon's favor. But to that end, we've had an article out this week from Mitch McConnell, who was the Republican lead in the US Senate, who's now going to be running their appropriations, which is basically another word for budget committee. And he has suggested that America's defense budget needs to be doubled from $1 trillion to $2 trillion, 6% of gross domestic product, as a multi-generational investment in the national defense base. And quite shockingly, despite supposedly bringing in Elon Musk and old Vivek Ramaswamy to slice and dice the federal deficit, President Trump then came out and said that even if America didn't increase its defense budget, he thinks the Europeans should be paying in 5% of their gross domestic product. So for some countries, that would be not a doubling, but a tripling. Obviously, some of the Baltic states and the Poles are already at about 4%. But for Britain, that would represent a more than doubling, which would be quite an increase of frozen pensioners, noting, of course, that the pension credit application deadline for the most hard up of them expired yesterday, with many hundreds of thousands of individuals really still not understanding what they actually needed to do online in multi-page forms in order to try and protect their well-being over the cold winter period. But it should be noted as well that President Putin, as I tried to explain to a larger audience in my account of the November 19th new Russian nuclear deterrence documentary that we posted the next day on weaponizednews.com, and is still available and still the only narration of that document, sentence by sentence. Once again, he fulfilled one of those requirements, and he said that he would do a demonstration attack on Kiev, and he would invite the West in a technological duel to bring every air defense that they've got. He would tell them the location, the day, the time, do it in broad daylight, and he would prove the validity of the Oreshnik weapon system, the hypersonic Mark 10 one, against anything they would care to line up with absolute certainty of the location, time, and place of the attack. So that's a pretty darn confident challenge, and he reiterated that to Russian media after his year-end telethon that literally was a telethon. They had to use AI to filter through 2.1 million telephone calls and questions. And he sat there answering as many groups of questions as he could for 4.5 hours. So whoever your guests may think that they'd swap Joe Biden out for the remaining 30 days of the American decline of its global status, I suspect that they're not going to do a better job than 4.5 hours of live questions.
No. 4.5 minutes would be Joe Biden's limit. And after 4.5 minutes of Keir Starmer, the entire audience would be asleep. Simon, thank you for that, as always. Now, if you're watching on TikTok tonight, a big hello to you. Thanks for the 21,000 likes so far. You can't donate to the show on TikTok, but please do keep tapping the screen to leave a like. Let's go to Missouri, where Ibrahima wants to talk about the Arab leaders. Well, if we have to, Ibrahima, go ahead.
Thank you very much, George, for having me. Well, I wanted to draw your attention to the Middle Eastern leaders. Imagine a world of multipolarity where most Arab leaders, maybe even a fraction of them, build universities of research to build their own weaponry. With all the money they have, I think they are richer than the country where I live in, the United States. I'm an African and I am Muslim, but I'm trying to draw your attention to this concern after looking at what is happening in Gaza and in Syria, and God knows who is next. Can you imagine, instead of investing their money into buying European League clubs like Manchester City or PSG, I think the Qataris own PSG and another Arab, the
Emirates own Manchester City, yeah.
Okay, very, very well. And then probably rumors, if rumors were right, they're trying to buy Manchester United. George, with that money, don't you think they
were? Saudi Arabia owns 2 Premier League clubs. Sheffield United are currently top of the Championship, but they'll next year be in the Premiership, and so Saudi Arabia will own 2 Premiership clubs. The United Arab Emirates will own a third. So, yeah, their footprint, they do splash the cash, but on the wrong things, right?
Absolutely. Exactly. So can you imagine, George, if they would use that money to just create a research institution to build their own defense, just like Lockheed Martin's, BlackRock, and all these, military-industrial complex Leviathans creating havoc. If they would just have, for a second, if I could borrow from Shakespeare, have that milk of human kindness and see what is happening in Gaza. I could not sleep sometimes if I see pictures of kids, women, the elderly. Okay? So if Saudi Arabia or Qatar or one Arab nation with all the oil money, instead of buying these big clubs, I don't have anything against football. I love football. I'm a footballer myself. Okay? But can you imagine a world where they have their own research institutions, they build their own weapons, just like Iran does? Okay? Instead of running to Putin, Putin cannot be defending everybody. Putin is defending Africa today. I am from Africa. I'm from West Africa myself. Okay? If it was not for Putin, Syria would have fallen a long time ago. The reason why they would not easily attack Iran is because, George, Iran can defend Iran. Iran can build Iranian weaponry. But the Gulf Arab nations...
in fact, there's a queue to buy it. Well, you were good enough to quote Shakespeare. Shakespeare didn't say this, but if he was alive, he would. There's no point in the milk of human kindness if you've actually cut your own bollocks off. These people are not even men that are ruling the Arab world. They are eunuchs. They are belly-dancing eunuchs. And the reason they will not build the research and development and industrial production to defend themselves that you rightly call on them to do. The reason they will not do that is because they have no balls. They know that their masters would not approve of that. They are using arms sales as a way of kickback to the imperial overlords so as to keep themselves in power. I mean, it's not rocket science. The rulers in these Arab countries and their comprador of journalists and academics and so on, they are kept in power by the Western Empire. They buy weapons from the Western Empire, and the arms companies that sell them the weapons kick back some of the money to the politicians who took the decision to protect that dictator in the first place. They agree to recycle their petrodollars in dollars, of course. That's the first point. They agree to the demand that their oil and gas will be priced in dollars. Why? Why not in reals? Why not in the currency of the country that is producing the oil and gas? So, first of all, they agree to price it in another country's currency. Then they agree to waste much of it on these property deals, arms deals, stock market deals, in the bordellos and the casinos of the Western countries when they miraculously cast off the Arab robes, put on their loafers, and soft shoes shuffle round Harrods in the afternoon, Annabelle's in the evening, and God knows what bordello after that. That's the deal. So of course they will not do what you're asking them to do, because they are not men. Thank you for that call in Missouri. So scan the QR code if you want to send me a comment. Nikki A has done so. Who were Epstein and Maxwell working for? I have serious doubts that Trump will release the list. I think those on the list who incur Trump's anger might find themselves being publicly exposed. Very good point, Nikki. Arcane Eclectic, great name, says Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent for over 25 years. And Gareth Llewellyn says Trump will give Putin Ukraine because Putin agreed with Turkey and the Syrian insurgents to carve up Syria. Just watch the Ottoman Empire return. How little you know, Gareth. How little you know. Pine Martin says Trump met Melania at a party at Ghislaine Maxwell's. I didn't know that. That sounds fake, right? Well, do your own research. It is true. Well, Melania is not here to answer that heinous allegation herself. Sophia Bix says, I see Novara Media are trying to discredit you, G. I just don't understand them. Why? Many people in the comments on their post were critical of their nonsense with your clips out of context. Thank you, Sophia, for caring. It saves me from doing so. I mean that sincerely. Charlie in North Wales wants to talk about the Irish president, Michael D. Higgins. Go ahead, Charlie.
Good evening, George. Thank you very much for taking my call again. I just wondered, you were lamenting a couple of weeks ago about the lack of statesmanship and the lack of leadership in the UK government these days. You were reflecting on 20, 30, 40 years ago when there were actually people that had standards and values. But out of the blue, we get a piece of gold. We got Michael Higgins and Simon Harris in the wake of the Israeli embassy closing in Ireland, calling it out for what they're actually doing. They won't be cowed down to. They won't be bullied. And that was pure gold. It was pure statesmanship. My question to you would be, in my day, I had the honour of hearing Tony Benn live. He visited the school I was teaching at the time, and also Dennis Healy. They were figures with true gravitas and immense amounts of decorum, and they had conviction. my question to you is, do we have anyone left in the UK government that has that decorum, that statesmanship, and where have they gone?
I honestly think, Charlie, that you know the answer to that question. There's certainly none on view. There's none visible. When Mr. Wilson was the Prime Minister of Britain, it was said that there were at least 10 people on his front bench in his cabinet that were more than capable of taking over the premiership that afternoon, and most of them wanted to do so. You could not begin to make that claim about either this government or the previous one of Rishi Sunak, who's now living in Santa Monica, don't you know? He's a member of the British Parliament, but he's living in Santa Monica. Well, on one level, who wouldn't when you look out your window at the weather? But he promised people that he would stay in British politics if he lost. And that's yet another British parliamentary pre-election promise broken. No, the two people that you mentioned, Mr. Benn, Mr. Healy, I knew them well. I used to sit beside Mr. Healy. I was by the side of Mr. Benn for 40 years, right up until his funeral day at Westminster. He, without doubt, was the best Prime Minister that we never had. And there has been nothing like him, no one like him since. And I include myself, I include Mr. Corbyn. None of us could tie Mr. Benn's shoelaces. So the truth is, British politics is in a very, very, very steep decline. And the only consolation, it's not much of a consolation, that exactly the same thing is happening across all Western countries. Just look at who used to be there and who is there now. I did quite an interesting interview. I don't think it's out yet. Obnoxious, maybe Gayatri will tell me who it was. Mr. Obnoxious, something like that. But he turned out to be a really cool guy. Turned out to be really savvy, switched-on guy. He's the owner of Bedford Football Club. But he has this podcast on the side. I went into great detail, at great length, on the subject you just raised in that interview. We'll make sure that it gets put up online when it comes out. Thanks, Charlie. Alwyn is in England, in Suffolk, on the boycott. Alwyn, what would you like to say?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. Just wanted to give everyone a friendly reminder, really. We all know that there's one sort of common denominator in the Middle East, and that's Israel. We need to be boycotting them more. Certainly there's a list of boycott companies at boycott.wordpress, I think, .news. Just check that. Is boycott. I'll find it. Give me 1 second. But basically, this time of year, those sort of produce for Israel are going to be turning up in our shops, and we need to just check that we're not supporting Israel.
You need to check the barcode, Alwyn. Sorry, it's not a great line. You need to check the barcode. There's no excuse for buying anything at all from Israel, but more significantly, there's no argument at all for failing to boycott the biggest corporate collaborators with Israel. I'm against a long list of boycott goods, because if you try to boycott everything, you'll in the end boycott nothing. I'm for a very tight, short list of blue tick companies that are the worst offenders, the worst collaborators with Israel, and target them. And so if I ever see you with a can of Coca-Cola in your hands, be sure I will upbraid you. If I ever see you in Starbucks or ever see you in McDonald's, be sure you'll have to answer to me. Now, you might not care. You might say, get stuffed, I'll drink what I like, eat what I like. But if you do care, be sure that there are me and people like me who are determined upon this boycott. We're determined that everybody that we know should observe this boycott, and that the effects of that boycott should be discernible in the bottom line of these companies, year by year, getting worse for them every year. That's the only way we're going to help the Palestinian people from freeing themselves. Thank you, Alwyn. Now, you know I've got another show, Have It Out with Galloway. Here's how you can be on it. Watch this. Join me every week to Have It Out with Galloway. We discuss the great issues of the day and occasionally the odd philosophical meandering through the meaning of life. You can be on the show by contacting us at our website, haveitoutwithgalloway.com. You can be the star of the show. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, the guest on the show this week on Have It Out with Galloway is delightful Danny Haifong. If you've seen him on here with me before, he really is a class act, so do watch out for it. Now, you, by the way, should know that there's a Christmas special on Wednesday. And on it is Gerald Celente, is Abby Martin, is some of the biggest names that have ever been on the mother of all talk shows. You can see me interview all of them on Wednesday in the Christmas special. Don't miss it, 7 p.m. UK time. If you get fed up of the festivities, if you're brimful of good cheer, why not go into another room and switch on so that you can follow MOATS. Josh is in London on Syria. Go ahead, Josh.
Hi there, George. Yeah, sorry, just so I can, sort of clarify, you're in a bit of a state of despair about, what happened in Syria. So am I, okay, but I don't think it's a fatal set. It is a major setback for Putin, but it's not a fatal one because he still has Iran as an ally. He is actually making, overtures to Afghanistan. He's obviously still got China and North Korea. I just think that, and he still has actually got some military presence in Syria, and he will attempt to be pragmatic with the new incumbent regime. Not that I abhor the new incumbent regime in Syria, obviously, but I just don't think it's, at worst, it's a postponement for the sort of, like the ushering of a new world order. It's not, it's only a deferral. This is not a prevention of it. What say you, George?
Well, I think it's more my feelings about what will now happen to the Syrian people and what will happen to the Palestinian people. My number one foreign policy preoccupation for 50 years that have led to any despair. But despair doesn't last for long, so don't worry, Josh. I have bounced back from any despair that you may have discerned. Now, will President Trump release the Jeffrey Epstein files, yes or no? 21,333 people voted, and overwhelmingly they say no, that Donald Trump will not release the Jeffrey Epstein files. Me? How do I know? Let's see if Gayatri can shed any light on that with her social media roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, I actually wanted to start off with Kazan because I thought that
it was hard for us to watch, wasn't it?
The attack on Kazan, I just can't help but think this is no coincidence. I mean, the way Shabos puts it is, as I've consistently said, Zelensky knows He literally has days to try to force Vladimir Putin's hand into escalation. That's why Kiev is launching desperate attacks against Kazan. Putin won't play his game, and Zelensky should pack his bags while he still can. So Kazan is northeast from Moscow. So this was
1,400 kilometers from the front
line. I mean, this is very impressive on Ukraine's part, and that's why very desperate it seems indeed.
Yeah, but why couldn't Russia shoot it down over 1,400 miles?
Well, I guess it's just miraculously there were no casualties in the capital of Tatarstan of 1 million plus. Obviously, we were there, and it was attacked because it hosted the major historic events. This happens after all the news came out that Putin and Trump, they are agreeable and look forward to normal relations, i.e. the end of Russophobia, the endless Russophobia that has come from America, from Britain, from the Western Hemisphere. So this is all obviously creeping in onto Zelensky. President Putin also just had his annual end-of-year press conference, also something that
Can we call it a press conference? It was an Olympic
marathon.
It was an Olympic performance.
Yes. Yeah.
4.5 hours.
Yeah.
1.1 million questions were submitted.
Yeah, and these are not questions from friends. There were foes, plenty of foes among them, national and international. So imagine.
The BBC were there, the American broadcasters were there. Although no Russian broadcaster would even be allowed to work in Britain, never mind be that close to the president and get to ask him a question.
Yeah, and the British Prime Minister could never dream of doing something like what President Putin does. Oh my goodness.
No notes, no auto cues.
Nothing.
4.5 hours.
Oh, hardly a break.
Taking all these questions from around the world without notes. That's the measure of Putin compared to the dwarfs that rule the Western countries.
Well, the headlines that are showing this weekend in regards to our Prime Minister is that he needs a holiday. Pity him.
He needs a holiday. He's been in 6 months and he's feeling the stresses and strains.
I think it is time to... is it possible to recall this petition for a general election, which hit almost 3 million?
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that because Norman Brennan just mentioned it's only 3,000 away from the 3 million mark, demanding a new general election in Britain. So if you haven't signed the petition yet, please do it.
Exactly. On the subject of our Prime Minister, if I was the Prime Minister of the UK, I'd be tripping over myself to encourage good relations with the USA. So how is appointing Mandelson achieving this? If ever the wrong message can be sent, this is it. All I can say, a Prime Minister who was in control would never do this. Even Stevie Wonder can see this is a bad decision. But as you say, George, Starmer's time is limited, so he doesn't really care, and it tells you all you need to know about this party's government.
A thing that struck me, which, alas, only those done certain age will get. There used to be an appallingly fifth-rate British comedian who inexplicably had a series on the BBC. His name was Harry Worth. Harry Worth and Keir Starmer must be related. They look the same. And the point about Harry Worth was everything he did, he blundered, made mistake after mistake, knocking things over, breaking things, making every matter worse. That is Keir Starmer. Check him out, Harry Worth. He's even got the same specs, although Keir Starmer paid thousands for his.
Starmer will turn out to be the most evil man in history of prime ministers. He surely is a tyrant and he needs to go. What a terrible individual. So this message came from Paddy in Belfast, a proud Palestinian. The poll then, will President Trump release the Epstein files? Interesting results. No.
Overwhelming, yeah. Look, on Telegram, 82% no. On Twitter, even 70% no. YouTube community poll, 76%.
Because everyone believes he is.
They think he's compromised.
Yes. And you.
But if he was, the Democrats would have spilled that long, long ago.
Who knows? I mean, more of this, please, says the files aren't for justice. They are for blackmail. Sexual blackmail is the new currency of political power. So Trump will not release them, whatever they have on him. And Roy Douglas says if he wants to go the same way as Lincoln and Kennedy, then it isn't going to happen, regardless what he says. And Guy 2K says if Epstein's religion had saints, he'd be one. Sex is a sacrament with these guys. It's incredible. But a lot of people make the point that it's actually more important to get the JFK files out, which is an interesting question, which is actually more of public interest for Americans.
Yeah, but I want the JFK and the RFK files. I want the MLK files. I want the Malcolm X files. I want the files of every dirty war that the CIA and the alphabet soup of the American deep state have ever been involved in. I want all those files out. I mean, how could it now be a matter of national security to know exactly why Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald? Exactly who was involved in the killing of Martin Luther King? Exactly who killed Robert F. Kennedy? Exactly who killed President Kennedy? There's no conceivable national security issue there. There's only lying to protect the very state agencies that carried out these crimes.
Well, I guess we have got 29 days to go and to see what the inauguration of President Trump
29 days to Trump, only a few days to Christmas. We better get our Christmas shopping done, hadn't we? Have you got the turkey? Thank you, Gayatri. We'll go for some turkey chips after the show. I've got time for one last call from Talid in Michigan on Syria. Talid, go ahead.
Hey, George. Good evening to you and to your audience, and happy holiday to you and to your audience again. I am lucky this is my second call this week to your show. Actually, I have a comment and a couple of questions to you, if you don't mind. I will start with my question. You are one of those true Palestinian supporter, and you have been. I've been following you and watching what you're doing for many years. I'm curious, given all the changes in the Middle East and lately what happened in Syria, which is at the first glance, it's a big loss to the Palestinian resistance and to the area. It kind of went from one column to another, and we don't want to go too much here. So my question to you, if Mahmoud Abbas, which you are very critical to him, or Hamas leader, asks you the question, what we should do at this point, given all these changes, if you to advise them, what will be your advice? That's the first question. The second question...
it wouldn't be... Yeah, go ahead. What's your second point?
Yeah, the second question is about Russia and West in general, and Russia and Ukraine in particular. In 2010, 2011, when what he called it back then Arab Spring, which is the Arab destruction, started, Putin, for his own reason, went along all the way till Libya when he voted with the decision for the United Nations, or to give the Western umbrella under UN Charter to interfere. But when it came to Syria, he kind of held his ground and defended Syria, and we know the rest of the story. Back then, I predicted, and I have a couple of brothers who are political analysts, and they are on the TV most of the day. I told them West will start create problem for Putin, because Putin worked for his country interest, West worked for Israeli interest. They will continue what they are doing in the Middle East. In 2014, Ukraine conflict started, and 2020 to what happened since then. My question in this, Putin, and everybody knows how many times West tricked him and lied to him. And I see everyone putting a lot of hope that with Trump being elected, there is a very good chance that the course of action will change. Now, my question to you, what is the pace for to be optimistic if we know that the government do not decide in the West? The Western government is driven by lobbies, and the history showed us that they are after Russia, I guess, no matter what. What makes you and others optimistic that this war could end and Putin will trust the West again, and the West will play again as a good citizen in that?
You're confusing me with being optimistic. Optimistic is nothing like how I'm feeling about the world situation, particularly the Palestinian situation. The last thing in the whole world I am is optimistic about that. I'm optimistic that the Palestinians will continue to resist. I'm optimistic that where they are able to, they will continue to resist by force of arms, which is their legal and moral right. And indeed, the resistance in the camps this very week has begun to take the form of knife attacks, which is horrifically dangerous for the resistance fighter. You have to get to zero distance in order for that to be a factor. But on 2 occasions this week, the Palestinian resistance, by use of knives, destroyed their occupiers' military positions and took their personal weapons. And heroic resistance is one thing, but when it has to be conducted by knife, that's an indication of the things to come, the shape of things to come. The shape of things to come is that the resistance will be increasingly disarmed. That's an ineluctable consequence of the change of government in Syria. It's not the only reason to lament the people who are now in power in Damascus. They are arriving by the plane load. Every Western empire offshoot in the world is now, before long, the new leader of Syria, Golani, he'll be in a tuxedo. He's gone from the Al-Qaeda ISIS garb to a suit, shirt, and tie in a week. It's a tuxedo next, black tie, believe me. And that tells me what kind of Syria it's now going to be. But that's no longer my main point. You asked me what advice I would give to the leadership in Hamas, to Abbas and the Palestine National Authority. First of all, it's not my job to give them advice. My solidarity with the Palestinian people involves me doing what I can do. Definitely not advising others what they should do. I'm responsible for, if you like, the Western Front. I'm one of the leaders over 50 years of the campaign to ostracize Israel in the way that apartheid South Africa was ostracized, to boycott, to divest, to take sanctions against. That's my job. It's not my job to fight for the Palestinians, and it's not my job to publicly, at least, give advice to their leaders. But as an observer, I saw the events in the camp this week where the fighters were fighting with knives. Now, it may just have been a coincidence, and they did succeed in liberating the personal weapons of the Israeli occupiers that they attacked. So they now do have weapons. But it struck me as a metaphor for the situation that we now have, that the transmission of weapons, war material, money, personnel from Iran to the resistance in Lebanon and to the resistance in Gaza, but also, by the way, in the West Bank, where the Palestinians were being armed by Iran in the West Bank to defend themselves against these crazy settlers and the occupation, illegal occupation of the Israeli army. Make no mistake about this. The International Court of Justice unequivocally, just a couple of weeks ago, declared the Israeli occupation of Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza to be completely illegal, and ipso facto resistance to that illegal occupation completely legal, and moreover stated that Western countries aiding and abetting the illegal occupation of Gaza, Jerusalem, and the West Bank were themselves guilty of crimes. It is a legal obligation on all countries to take action against the illegal Israeli occupation. And of course, the very opposite is happening. I'm only responsible for what I do and for what the people who follow me do. I take that responsibility. I will never relinquish it. And the last word on my lips, if I can arrange it, will be Palestine. Trust me, Khalid, on that. Well, the general election petition I mentioned before, we can put it up on the screen. It is a hair's breadth away at 2,996,701 signatories. Whoa! You could be the 3 millionth signatory. Get busy and get signing that petition. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. On behalf of Gayatri and myself, I wish each and every one of you a Merry Christmas. None of this happy holiday stuff from us. A Merry Christmas from Gayatri, me, and the mother of all talk shows. And I'll be back on Christmas night at 7 p.m. UK time. See you then.